What happens when the most powerful man in the world threatens a sovereign nation? Not for an act of war, not for breaking a treaty, but for daring to uphold its own laws. This isn't fiction. This is Donald Trump's 2025 ultimatum to Brazil. The demand: stop the prosecution of a former leader for attempt of coup and, conveniently, a doormat for Washington interests. The threat? Crippling economic warfare? But Brazil just gave an answer that will echo across the globe against this external interference. Today we're breaking down the showdown that could signal the end of American dominance as we know it. On July 9, 2025, Donald Trump did something that would have been unthinkable even during the height of the Cold War. He threatened Brazil with a crippling tariff of 50%. Starting August 1st, according to a letter he sent to the country's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. But here's what makes this truly insidious. Trump wasn't demanding trade concessions or economic reforms. He was demanding that Brazil's Supreme Court drop criminal charges against far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro. Let me repeat that for clarity. The U.S. president tried to blackmail a foreign judiciary through trade warfare. This is the highest tariff rate the Trump administration has threatened this week, and it marks a major escalation from the baseline 10% announced against all BRICS nations. Think about the implications here. Trump is weaponizing America's economic power to interfere directly in another country's legal system, specifically to protect a man accused of attempting to overthrow democracy. The charges against Bolsonaro aren't trivial political theater. We're talking about a systematic attempt to stage a military coup after losing the 2022 elections. On January 8, 2023, Bolsonaro supporters, directly copying Trump's January 6 playbook, stormed Brazil's Congress, Supreme Court, and presidential palace in a violent attempt to overturn democratic results. But Trump's support for Bolsonaro goes deeper than simple authoritarian solidarity. Justice Alexandre de Moraes, the Brazilian Supreme Court justice overseeing Bolsonaro's case, has been sanctioned by the Trump administration. Think about that. A sitting US administration sanctioning a foreign Supreme Court justice for doing his job prosecuting coup plotters. But if you think this is really about Bolsonaro, you're missing the bigger picture. Trump's rage against Brazil exploded immediately after one specific event: the BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro in July 2025. It was in this context, 2 days after the BRICS summit concluded, that Trump posted his letter to Lula. The timing isn't coincidental, it's strategic. Trump took aim at the 10-member bloc, which seeks to strengthen emerging economies, framing its interests as adversarial to the U.S.'s. Let's understand what BRICS represents to the American empire. An existential threat. This isn't the old BRICS of just 5 countries. We're talking about a bloc that now includes 10 full members and 10 partner countries, representing 56% of the world's population and 44% of the global economy when measured at purchasing power parity. Under Lula's leadership, Brazil has become a driving force in this anti-hegemonic project. Brazil is chairing BRICS in 2025, and the Rio summit was a massive success that showcased the bloc's growing confidence and ambition. The 2025 summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, took place July 6th to 7th and focused on global governance reforms, as well as cooperation among the global South community. But here's what really terrifies Washington. The de-dollarization push by BRICS nations is intended to reshape global trade, focusing on the use of local currencies for bilateral trade, investment, and financial transactions. We're not just talking about symbolic gestures here. During the BRICS summit in Kazan, members discussed the development of BRICS Pay, a decentralized payment messaging system aimed at facilitating transactions in local currencies. As proposed, the decentralized scheme would allow BRICS countries to trade with each other without converting to US dollars by utilizing blockchain technology and tokens, effectively circumventing the SWIFT network. The US dollar's global dominance is the foundation of American imperial power, allows the US to print money while the rest of the world pays for it through inflation. It enables Washington to weaponize sanctions and cut countries out of the global financial system. When BRICS talks about de-dollarization, they're talking about dismantling the financial architecture of American hegemony. But here's where the story gets beautiful. Lula isn't backing down, not even a little bit. Brazil's President Lula is firing back at Trump's 50% tariff threat, saying Brazil is ready to match any U.S. import taxes, dollar for dollar. But it goes deeper than tit-for-tat tariffs. Lula is articulating a vision of Brazilian sovereignty that directly challenges American hegemony. Listen to Lula's words. The world does not need an emperor. The U.S. is not the global emperor. This isn't diplomatic language. This is a declaration of independence from American domination. In a powerful interview, Lula explained the historical context. The Americans have always interfered in Latin American politics. They were responsible for the coup in Brazil, responsible for the coup in Chile, for the coup in Uruguay, for the coup in Argentina. So yes, it's part of American political culture, and that's what I stood up against, because Brazil is a sovereign country. This historical awareness is crucial. Lula isn't speaking as some naive leader who doesn't understand power dynamics. He's someone who was imprisoned in a U.S.-backed judicial coup in 2018, what he calls lawfare designed to prevent him from winning that year's presidential election, and to install the U.S. puppet Bolsonaro instead. Lula revealed how deep U.S. involvement went in his persecution. The U.S. Department of Justice guided American prosecutors, participated in my case, came to Brazil to meet with the Brazilian Public Prosecutor's Office. The judge and the prosecutors went to the United States to discuss my conviction with the American prosecutors. We have recorded testimony of American prosecutors celebrating my arrest. The so-called Operation Car Wash that imprisoned Lula has since been exposed as a fraudulent political operation. The United Nations Human Rights Committee investigated and concluded that the judicial proceedings against Lula were politically motivated and violated his civil rights. He was completely exonerated, but only after Bolsonaro had been installed in power through this judicial coup. Now Lula is in power again, and he's making it clear. Those days of Brazilian subservience are over. Here's where Trump's strategy reveals its fundamental stupidity. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says Brazil will not accept any form of tutelage, and he will impose tariffs of his own if Trump carries through with the tariffs. But Brazil isn't just posturing. They have real leverage. First, there's the absurd contradiction in Trump's own policy. The U.S. actually has a trade surplus with Brazil. America exports more to Brazil than it imports. So when Trump claims he's fighting trade deficits, he's actually destroying one of America's few trade surpluses. More importantly, Brazil has options. China is already Brazil's largest trading partner, and that relationship has been growing exponentially, as Lula explained. In my first year as president, the trade flow between Brazil and China was only $6 billion. When I left in 2010, it was already $76 billion. The commercial relationship between Brazil and China grew 16 times during my term. Brazil's focus is not on replacing the dollar overnight, but on building alternatives to U.S.-controlled systems like SWIFT. Key initiatives include real yuan direct trades, by bypassing the dollar in transactions with China. Brazil aims to cut costs and reduce vulnerability to U.S. economic coercion. Lula spelled out Brazil's position clearly. Brazil's trade with the U.S. represents 1.7% of its GDP. It's not like we can't survive without the U.S. This isn't bravado. It's economic reality. Brazil is a major food and energy exporter with deep ties throughout the global south. And here's the kicker. Lula announced that if Trump follows through with tariffs, Brazil will accelerate its de-dollarization efforts. We are interested in creating a trade currency among other countries. I'm not obligated to buy dollars to conduct trade with Venezuela, Bolivia, Chile, Sweden, the European Union, or China. We can trade in our own currencies. Brazil's resistance isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a broader awakening across Latin America against what Lula calls American tutelage. The data tells the story. The majority of South American countries now trade more with China than with the United States. Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, China is their largest trading partner. The farther a Latin American country is from the U.S. border, the more it trades with China. This represents a fundamental shift in global economic gravity. China has been quietly building infrastructure and trade relationships across Latin America, while the U.S. has been busy with military adventures abroad. The port of Chancay in Peru, built by a Chinese state-owned company, is a perfect example. This massive Pacific port significantly reduces transit time for trade between China and Latin America. And now, Brazil and China are planning something even more ambitious, a transcontinental railroad connecting Brazil's Atlantic coast to Peru's Pacific coast. As the official BRICS website explains, railway investments stand out not only for their numerous benefits, but also for initiating a strategic partnership aimed at fostering cooperation among countries of the global south. The shared goal is development, strengthening the BRICS presence on the continent and amplifying its voice in global affairs. Lula has been explicit about the political goals. It is with China that we will strengthen SEC, referring to the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, a regional bloc that brings together all independent countries from Latin America and the Caribbean to promote the region's political, economic, social, and cultural integration. Trump's hysterical reaction to Brazil and BRICS reveals something crucial about the current moment. American hegemony is in crisis, and the empire is lashing out in desperation. This is a pattern we've seen before with declining empires. The British Empire became increasingly aggressive and unstable as it lost its dominance. The same with the French, Ottoman, and Spanish empires. When empires can no longer maintain their position through economic and soft power alone, they resort to increasingly crude threats and violence. Trump's declaration that Brazil represents a threat to U.S. national security, because it regulates American tech companies and prosecutes coup plotters, would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous. This is the logic of a declining hegemon that sees any assertion of independence as an existential threat. The involvement of Elon Musk adds another layer to this story. Musk has been using Twitter X as a weapon to interfere in Brazil's internal affairs, spreading disinformation to support Bolsonaro and destabilize Lula's government. When Brazil moved to regulate this interference, Trump responded by declaring Brazil a national security threat. This reveals the real nature of American democracy promotion. It's about ensuring that U.S. corporations can operate without any accountability, that U.S.-backed politicians can spread lies and incite coups without consequences, and that any country that resists becomes a target for economic warfare. What we're witnessing is nothing less than the birth of a new world order. The bloc's long-term success will depend on its ability to balance these competing interests while advancing its broader economic and political goals. But the trajectory is clear. Here's a stunning statistic that shows how Trump's bullying is backfiring. A poll published by Bloomberg found that a plurality of people in Brazil would prefer aligning with BRICS over the United States. 38.1% of Brazilians said they should be aligned most closely with BRICS, while only 31.1% said the United States. When you combine BRICS with China, which is obviously part of BRICS, 51% prefer alignment with the China-BRICS axis versus just 31% for the U.S. Trump's threats aren't creating submission. They're accelerating the move away from American hegemony. This moment represents a fundamental choice for the global South: continued subordination to a declining but still dangerous empire, or the difficult but necessary work of building alternative institutions and relationships. Brazil under Lula has chosen resistance. China and Russia have chosen to build alternatives to Western-dominated institutions. More and more countries are deciding that the costs of challenging American hegemony are outweighed by the costs of continued subordination. The American empire isn't going to collapse overnight, and it will likely become more dangerous as it declines. But what's happening between Trump and Brazil shows us the future. A world where the global South refuses to be bullied, where alternative economic systems challenge dollar dominance, and where the former colonies finally break free from their former masters. Lula said it best: Brazil is a sovereign country. Brazil has the right to decide its own policies. And that's precisely why we absolutely cannot accept the role that the United States consistently tries to impose upon all of humanity, perpetually wanting to be the world's sole sheriff and global enforcer. This is the voice of the future, not American unipolarity, but genuine multipolarity, where every nation, not just the Western powers, has a say in how the world is organized. The empire is fighting back, but it's too late. The world has changed, and there's no going back. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe the channel to keep thinking the world how it really is.